As I'm writing these words, I haven't yet watched the final arc of the show Star Wars Andor. As I am reading them, it has been days since its release, and as you're listening to them, it will probably have been weeks since we watched it. The episodes are here, they're waiting for me, but before I allow myself to close that chapter, I wanted to write down some of my thoughts. The Andor series we know is very different from the version it was first imagined as. From a show following the adventures of an elite rebel agent and his snarky metal companion, to a horror episode taking place on a cargo ship haunted by a monstrous Kayak security droid, the ideas that were discarded or left out are plenty, but they allowed the show to be what it is now. Andor tells the story of an all-in-all minor character in the great Star Wars mythology. The silent deuteragonist of the saga's first spin-off feature-length live-action movie didn't appear at the time the best choice to carry by himself the 20 hours that make up a TV show. But it is that choice that allowed it to grow into what we have today. For Cassian Andor isn't special, and that is precisely the point. Born on Kenari, raised on Ferrix, talented thief, looking for his sister, enemy of corporate security forces, prison escapee, elite spy, pilot, journalist, messenger, Cassian's story isn't a common one. But despite that, he is but one piece of the rebellion and its fight against the Empire. Every rebel soldier, every person and character who's present on Atollon, or Yavin, or Hoth also has their own story, a story that will never be told, a story suggested to us through that of Cassian. A man who, faced with the military occupations of the Republic and the Empire, learned to channel his resentment to become invisible, before being forced to actually take part in the fight, realizing that the horrors before him are worth opposing, and finally using his rage to help put an end to the tyranny he's hated for so long. But Cassian isn't alone, and although the show bears his name, it doesn't only tell his story. Andor tells of Bix Caleen, a woman, the first on Ferrix to actually take part in the rebellion. A woman who fights, a woman who loves, and who loves in a way that never before had been this explicit in a cinematographic Star Wars medium. A woman whose agency was broken, whose mind was shattered by Dr. Ghost's ghastly tortures. A woman whose agency and free will were once again trampled underfoot by an Imperial officer as despicable as he is common when he tried to rape her. A woman on the verge of collapse who was finally given a chance to take revenge and free herself from her ghosts. A woman who would wind up breaking free from the story itself that was dooming her to die before the end of the show due to the nature of her universe and its canon. Andor tells of Syril Karn, a number in the system, an enforcer of order, a devout servant of the ideal embodied by the Empire, who doesn't notice that it is the Empire itself and its structure who crushed him more than the man he holds responsible for the collapse of his career and of his life. A soul lost between the mass and the self, lost between his role as an agent for the Imperial Security Bureau and his humanity as he witnesses the pain of the Gorman people. A tool for the Empire who sees his reflection in a droid's expressionless face. A character who, even after being done with a mission and a relationship that were keeping him in the dark without information, couldn't prevent his basest rage from taking hold of him at the sight of the man who cost him everything. Syril Karn, a man who, despite his story, his choices, his fights and struggles, was only, just like Cassian, an ordinary man, just another corpse on Palmo Plaza. Andor tells of the rebellion. It tells of Mon Mothma, a character with prior appearances but without much depth, whose relevance to the Skywalker saga was in large part discarded in the editing room of Revenge of the Sith. Mon Mothma, figurehead of the rebellion, is presented both in a new lens and in the same way we were first introduced to her, through her sacrifices. Here the cost isn't many Bothans but her own life, her relationships all tainted by the paramount importance of her secrets and the constant danger of being discovered, her husband, who she would end up throwing under the bus to take the blame for the banking fluctuations linked to her actions, her own daughter sent off to be married in a deal she considers, and with good reason, like her selling her off, her childhood friend, her seat in the Senate, her safety, her naivety and innocence. Mon Mothma's sacrifices are many, but she isn't the only one who sacrificed everything. Andor tells of Luthen Rael, the dark shadow of the fight against the Empire. Not Saw Gerrera's unstable and explosive extremism, but the pragmatic inhumanity we'd expect from the ISB or from Tarkin. For that is what Luthen sacrificed. He sacrificed his humanity, his legacy, all for the cause. It's a sacrifice he doesn't shy away from, a sacrifice he wears on his face like the wigs he uses to deceive. But it's a sacrifice that gnaws at him little by little, one he regrets but one he already trapped himself in, a sacrifice that makes him slowly crack and break under the weight and scale of all he's built. A sacrifice that fates him not to go out in a blaze of glory, but to mercilessly fade away with time, as his once crucial role grows obsolete, as his network of spies, agents and rogue cells grows into the army of the rebellion, turning his shadow operations into an open war. Of course, these characters aren't the only ones whose story is told by the show. Willman, Brasso, Marva, B2, Clea, Vel, Cinta, Melshi, Kino, Lonnie, the Aldani strike team, the people of Ferrix, Anto Krieger's group, Maya Pei's rebel cell, the Partisans, the Gorman front, the Yavin base. But Andor isn't just about its characters. Until now, the Galactic Empire's inspirations were merely an aesthetic or a backdrop. The German Sturmtruppen from World War I and the Nazi Sturmabteilung, the Waffen-SS officer uniforms, the construction and deployment of mass destruction weapons against civilian populations, the struggle of a native people as outnumbered as it is technologically outmatched in the forest it calls home. Andor shows us this totalitarian dictatorship in all its reality and all its violence. Here, stormtroopers aren't the basis of the Imperial Army, but its elite forces. TIE fighters aren't simply moving targets, but banshees, vultures, and forces of the terror that makes the regime. Officers aren't simply enemies without armor, but the representative of this violence as clean as it is inhumane. The series' antagonist isn't the Sith Order, or the Inquisitorius, or any other entity related to the dark side of the Force. It is the Imperial Security Bureau, Palpatine's Geheime Staatspolizei, his Empire's political police and spy network. Andor's horror isn't supernatural, it is human, and that's what renders it all the more terrifying. It is that of an oppressive regime that displaces peoples and erases cultures and imprisons without reason to feed its war machine. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow and now it's here. It's here and it's not visiting anymore. It wants to stay. The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep. Marva Andor left us with this warning and this call to fight at the end of Season 1, and Season 2 only strengthened the reality of her words. Here we see the terror of the Empire, not the clean lethality suggested by its aesthetic, but its actual, primal, raw violence. The consequences of Dr. Gore's tortures are shown to us directly, as if we had lived them personally, as the Empire decides to extend him into an entire program. And although Bix puts an end to these ambitions, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. He may have haunted her dreams for 2 whole years, but Gore's memory of Bix is only a vague impression of having met her before. The Empire's oppression is of course illustrated here through the Gorman massacre, an unspeakable horror, enacted for the sole purpose of acquiring strategic resources. A fully engineered slaughter whose outcome was already determined in advance, both at Krennic's Wannsee conference, Heinz-Berghof, and by the canon itself. The Gorman massacre happened, therefore it will happen, and nothing the characters could do would be able to avoid it. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine, the Ministry of Enlightenment, is running at full throttle. Stereotypes are enforced, preconceived ideas become state policies, HoloNet reduced to another weapon in the Empire's arsenal. False flag operations and actual acts of rebellion are blended in a blood mass, for the characters as well as the audience. Losses are calculated, leaks are thought out in advance, all to be able to freely wield and control public opinion. So much so that, when the massacre happens, the galaxy's reaction isn't outrage, but the thought that maybe Gorman deserved it. And the massacre itself is an even more direct show of horror. It's not the landing of a cruiser and protesters. It's not a clean orbital bombardment of the planet. The crowd, civilians, is lured in by the Empire and trapped in a real killing chamber. And despite the warnings of Caro Rylance, the Cassandra of this fall of Troy, despite Cassian and Wellman's improvised mission, despite Lezine successfully turning the screams of the crowd's righteous anger into the embodiment of Gorman's culture and suffering, the machine is already running. And whatever her gripes and feelings might be, Dedra Meero's order unleashes a violence that cannot be stopped. Imperial troops fire in the crowd. The armed Gormans fire back. The Empire deploys its KX droids, mechanical war machines, battle droids that had never before been portrayed in such a terrifying way. Despite everyone's efforts, despite the sufferings, the characters' internal and external struggles, the Gorman anthem becomes its swan song, as it burns very brightly for the galaxy to see. Gorman's message would reach its destination through a heroic speech and mission, and its sacrifice would allow the rebel groups to merge into a real army. But in truth, it was no sacrifice. Andor has never shied away from using accurate wording, however unseemly it might look or inconvenient it might feel. The distance between what is said and what is known to be true has become an abyss. Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous, The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. What took place yesterday, what happened yesterday on Gorman, was unprovoked genocide. Mon Mothma's last speech in the Imperial Senate speaks of truth and of the importance of truth. And I think it important that I too take a part in it, and use the space and platform I'm allowed in service not of a political agenda, but of the series, of Star Wars, and of the truth it lays bare before us. For Andor isn't about the past, it's not even about the future or the present. Andor shows us a pattern, a system, a disease destined to be passed down through generations with a regularity so precise that historical events merge with recent news. Tony Gilroy isn't gifted with future sight, he simply studied history. That's what makes this series timeless. And in that way, Andor is a contemporary show. The rise of the far-right, in France where I live, in Europe, in America and in the world, is neither news nor a surprise anymore, but it remains nonetheless a danger. Fear is encouraged, so is hate, so is rejection of anything different or other, disregarding the humanity we all share. Empathy is demonized, seen as a weakness, something to be eliminated. The individual must conform or it is a threat. But the most twisted danger of totalitarianism is that it doesn't even need to turn a people into its zealots and defenders. It doesn't care if it was belief, an alliance of convenience, or it being seen as the lesser evil that brought it the votes it needed to be elected. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exists. This speech isn't that of Mon Mothma, but of Hannah Arendt in her book The Origins of Totalitarianism, published in 1951. And that is why propaganda is essential to authoritarian regimes. In a time where fake news are always and instantaneously available to anyone and can be created by anyone in a few seconds, where an actual image, voice or video is no longer discernible from artificially generated slop, it's therefore no surprise that totalitarianism is making a return. A monopoly of media by self-interested billionaires, Fox News and Rupert Murdoch for the US, Canal+ and Vincent Bolloré for France, Twitter and Elon Musk for the world. Moral panic campaigns against migrants, against the LGBTQ community, against Muslims. Jewish people across the world are lumped in with perpetrators of horrible acts, leading to an increase in the background of anti-Semitism that had never stopped being a danger. The individual becomes their community. The community becomes a list of clichés, criminals, pedophiles, terrorists, genocidal elites. Victims become perpetrators. News items become state affairs. Fake news make the headlines for weeks. Years-old events are unearthed and broadcasted as breaking news. Fake statistics are spewed relentlessly and shamelessly by the US president and his government. Misleading graphs altering the perception of minority groups in France and in the world. Baseless studies, like the Cass Review against gender transitions, decried and qualified as unsound research by the scientific and medical communities, by France, by Australia, are used as arguments to make law, like recently for Cass in the UK, where it rolled back human rights. Scientists are censored, forced to exile. Pages of information and research are deleted from official websites for political reasons in modern book burnings, putting vulnerable lives in danger by depriving them of their resources. Misinformation, propaganda, censorship, anti-intellectualism, idealization of obscurantism and extremist theocracy. The Overton window, what consists of the ideas considered acceptable in the public space, is inexorably moving. Society grows more extreme. And as countless atrocities are happening across the planet, the world's reaction, our reaction from above, is no more than indifference, a vague inconvenience, the galaxy's apathy for the Gorman massacre. And all this, while the corruption of world leaders, through pretend trials, purchases and gifts of luxury airplanes and towers, through a car ad campaign from the White House to surround themselves with the most powerful men on the planet, the barely hidden theft by these men of citizens' most private information, their medical and tax records under the cover of false government efficiency. The resurgence of an unashamed neo-Nazism with authorized protests and public gestures that are as clear as they are denied and defended despite their indisputable impact and message. Society's gradual resegregation, the goal of a systematic attack using portmanteau words as targets, SJW, woke, DEI, meaningless terms used only to save oneself the moral weight of calling one's racism and discriminations by their names. The consequences of this policy, the firing of competent staff, a political and discriminatory purge, and contradictory orders to entire state departments at the whims of the despicable drugged-up buffoon that happens to be the richest man on earth. The cult of personality through the MAGA brainless sect, through artificially generated pictures and videos depicting the president with the same reverence as the Italian Duce or the German Führer of the 20th century dictatorships, or through a military parade in honor of that emerging tyranny's great leader's birthday, go unnoticed. When it released in 2022, the Narkina arc from Andor Season 1 already appeared terrifyingly real, but it has now become reality. As of today, American prisoners and immigrants are sent out in a maximum security facility abroad, a mega prison in El Salvador where dehumanization, abuse and terrible conditions meet a massive overpopulation and basic human rights infringements. It's in this Narkina-like mega prison that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was sent, after being accused of being part of a terrorist gang using doctored evidence that were used by the White House to justify his conviction without trials or due process, or any possibility of appeal or any hope of returning. But he is only the first and the most famous. ICE has been turned into Donald Trump's private army, fulfilling the same role as Adolf Hitler's essays. The Nazi regime was born from the terror in the streets, from paramilitary groups enforcing their law even before they legally gained power. Even today, kidnapping-like arrests in broad daylight, similar to that of Cassian on Llanos, keep happening for all to see. One-way trips to El Salvador without mandates, without legal processes, and with full support from a government that takes pride in them. All of this in only 113 days since Donald Trump's inauguration. I mean, it's so confusing, isn't it? So much going wrong, so much to say, and all of it happening so quickly. The pace of oppression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident. Those words from Nemik on Aldhani sound very different today than they did when we heard them for the first time. And as the Justice Department and the separation of powers in the United States are increasingly eroded, questioning the future possibility of new free elections, as vulnerable minorities are still dehumanized, the pattern is clear. What this reality depicts, what Andor shows us, is a grim picture. But that is not the message of Andor. The struggle isn't in vain. The Imperial machine seems unstoppable, but it is destined to fail. It pushes the people who oppose it and those who are part of it to their limits. The time will come when they will break, and we know they will, that the rebels triumph at Yavin, at Endor, at Jakku, that even Darth Vader himself will reach his breaking point, and Kylo Ren after him. Tyranny always falls. The question isn't if, but when. In the midst of these historical events we live through, I wanted to lend these skills of mine, my pen, my brain, to the warning and testimony for which Cassian Andor and Star Wars Andor are the messenger. There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this: freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrections are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this: the Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks, authority is brittle, oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this: the day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this: try. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end. I must admit that it wasn't really planned, but the inspiration emerged spontaneously just before Andor's final arc, and that pure idea gave birth to what you just saw. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like on this video, comment your thoughts about it, and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. My Discord server is retired, but you can find my Instagram and all my relevant links in the description. That's also where you'll find all the sources I used to make this video. Once again, thank you, and I'll see you around.